So things like you can see up in the top right, those little things that look like charred mouse droppings or something, what they are burnt grains of emmer wheat. We know from radiocarbon dating, they're almost 6,000 years old. And that's the kind of material we recover from excavations. We can find out what people were eating at different places and at different times and in different social contexts. And that's what we're doing in the group and we're going to introduce you to today. Will I twiddle that? Yeah, perfect. And we think the data that we are generating through our work could potentially have impact far beyond archaeology. So that's the areas that we're going to show you about today and thinking about how archaeology can provide a deep context to understanding where we are today and how we've come to where we are today in food and in farming. So what we're going to look at are 4 projects that utilize data from archaeology, and the key to all of these is collaboration. So this is something that clearly we can't do on our own in archaeology. So you'll see in the projects we're working with lots of different people in plant science and in agricultural science in particular, also looking at folk life and folklore and looking at traditional methods of food and agriculture, looking at food science and nutrition, looking at policy as well, thinking about why in a modern context are people focused on certain farming strategies and why are they not doing others? Maybe there are incentives for them to grow a certain crop, which means they're not growing another crop. And then also looking at all the different stakeholders, the people who are working day in, day out in food production, the farmers, the food producers and food processors. So what we're going to talk about are 4 different projects. The first one I'll introduce very briefly is Diversicrop, so looking at underutilised crops in Europe. If you look over at the last one is a related project. So my colleague Adam Collins is going to look at underutilised crops in Ireland, specifically from an Irish perspective. My colleague Dr. Robert Power is going to be looking at food of the first farmers across Europe. And then my colleague Dr. Erin Crowley-Champoux is going to be looking at food security and food storage in prehistoric Ireland. So we're just going to give you a quick run through of all these things. Very, very briefly, in about 1 minute, I'm going to introduce you to Diversicrop. So this is looking at underutilised crops across Europe. We've just kicked off the project just last week with my colleague Sonia Negrau, I'll introduce you to in a minute. And what we're trying to do is trying to understand why certain crops have become underutilised over time and what could be done to try and bring them back into production and significantly increase production. It's a very collaborative network. We've been funded by EU Cost Action. We just started last week. And we have different work groups, as you can see here. So the ancient history one is the one that thinks about what was happening with these crops over time and how did they go out of use. We've decided for this to choose 3 target crops. We couldn't do everything within the time. So we're looking at rye and chickpeas and peas, which are crops that are underutilised in terms of production across Europe. And we think there could be great benefits to increasing their production significantly. They're sustainable crops. So looking at the deep history of how we've got to where we are today, because sometimes in the past, these crops were much more popular than they are today. Then looking at the crop science also, thinking about the types of varieties of these crops that might be better suited to some areas in Europe, and particularly in the context of climate change, where the growing conditions are changing, the better conditions. Also looking at nutrition, there's no point in growing these crops if you can't make healthy foods with them as well. So working with colleagues in nutrition to think about what you could use to make with these foods or with these crops, and also looking at policy, which I mentioned earlier, thinking about what are the barriers towards increased production or what's working well in certain areas across Europe. So this is what we're trying to do. It's a 4-year project. We just kicked off last week. The action chair is my colleague Sonia Negrau, who's in the School of Biology and Environmental Science. This is us in Brussels last week doing our victory sign because we did it, we made it, and we got the project. So have a look if you want to find out more or join the action. Please do look us up on the Cost Action website, look for Diversicrop. And it all started right here. Sonia and I had never met before, and we met at a UCD networking event and found out we both did plants. We come at it from a very different perspective, but we started talking. And then we found out about the Earth Institute Strategic Priority Fund. We put together a proposal, kept working, and here we are now in Brussels, leading a 4-year project. So thank you to the Earth Institute for that. It enables projects like this. So I'm going to hand you over to my colleagues who are going to talk about more collaborative projects and the kind of stuff we're doing in the food group. So Robert's next. I'll give you that as well.
It's a great pleasure to be able to speak today on my work here in the Earth Institute. So I'm here to talk about my SFI IRC Pathway Grant project, which I'm using to study ancient diets using dental calculus. So I just want to give you kind of a flavor of the project and some of the kind of interesting things we can do with dental calculus. So we're all a bit more familiar with the soft materials that build up in the teeth called dental plaque than we would like to be. This material is, of course, a sticky film of bacteria, a complex biofilm, and it forms due to the salivary ions of calcium phosphate being deposited on the bacteria biofilm, creating a hardened surface, which we call dental tartar or dental calculus. And this process can repeat itself, causing kind of the formation of a dense layered material, which is stable in the archaeological record. Of course, if this isn't removed, that leads to deterioration of dental health. So, fortunately, it's not all bad news. Every cavity has a silver lining, at least if we want to understand the human past. So, in the process of the formation of this material, traces of food and debris from the environment, airborne environment, or from others, can become trapped in this material. And this leaves us with a record of microscopic and molecular remains that can help us interpret ancient life, ancient environments, and ancient health that can preserve for thousands of, even hundreds of thousands of years. So my SFI IRC project is looking at human dental calculus from a variety of sites across Europe, particularly Ireland, to explore the dietary breadth of Neolithic diets in particular, going into the Bronze Age for kind of a later part of the project as well. And the idea is to look at Neolithic diets to help begin a project that looks at dietary breadth from a long-term perspective to kind of to develop a baseline for which we can understand human adaptation and resilience. So the methods I'm predominantly using are microscopic, which is kind of my focus, using plant remains such as phytoliths and starches, but also molecular methods, which are led by my PhD student, Megan Mackey. So we're looking at questions such as how well does dental calculus record Neolithic life in different conditions? How well does it tell us about food preparations in the past, and how people responded to different climatic regimes? So just to make this really brief, results so far, we're just kind of some way to go, but so far we have evidence of ancient diets, such as evidence from starch grains and phytoliths. We have evidence of fire markers that might tell us something about the cooking and the kind of smoky environments which people lived in. We also have evidence of fibers from processes such as ancient textile production, as well as pollen, health markers such as nematodes, as well as paleoproteomic evidence of diet, including plants and animals, as well as the quality of oral health in these ancient populations. So, so much more to come. So just watch this space.
Hi, my name is Dr. Erin Crowley-Champoux, and I'm part of the Foodsec team exploring food security in Bronze Age Ireland. Speaking collaboratively, working with Meriel, also Dr. Carrie Cleary and Dr. Penny Johnston, and then a number of additional collaborators, including Liam Ryan, who's a food scientist, Amy Styring, who does isotopes in Oxford, and organic farmers Dominic Greisen and Michael Miklas, as well as participants from folk life and folklore and lots of people. And we work with so many partners because we approach food security and food storage practices from a multi-stranded perspective. So looking at not just the environmental archaeological data, so animal bones and plant remains, but also food storage facilities like pots and underground storage facilities, as well as above ground storage structures. Also doing ethno-historical research on traditional food practices and food preservation, food storage practices and food storage preservation, and conducting experimental archaeology using ancient grains grown by the organic farmers and digging pits at the organic farms to explore the preservation environments of these storage facilities, and also conducting isotopic analysis of the individual cereal grains. So to date, project is in its second year, and we've collected data on now 106 archaeological sites. This includes data from including 228 individual pots, 15,507 macro plant remains. This includes cereal grains, but also weed seeds and chaff and other materials. So about 13,788 individual cereal grains are in our database. Unsurprisingly, the cereal grains are dominated by barley and wheat, barley predominantly, and naked barley. On the animal bone side, we have 43,680 animal bones, of which over 32,000 are identifiable. Most animal bones that you get on archaeological sites are fragmentary or burnt, and so you can't identify them. So this is actually quite a decent assemblage. The livestock species include cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. These are agricultural communities, and that assemblage is dominated by cattle at about 60%. We're also in the middle of experimentation on our organic farms. We've dug 6 pits at Cornstown House in County Meath, taking into account a variety of different variables, including grain species. So we have 2 emmer wheat, 2 naked barley, and 2 hulled barley pits, as well as the environment itself. So half of the pits are lined with straw, and the other half are unlined. Each of the pits have sensors that monitor temperature and humidity within the pit, as well as headspace, so the amount of CO2 within the pit environment. Next week, we're digging 4 additional pits in Kilkenny, so looking at a different geology, a different ecology, where we'll be looking at digging 2 emmer and 2 naked barley pits, both unlined and lined as well. So these are preliminary results, but certainly more to come as we go. Thank you.
Hi, so Adam Collins. I'm working on the Croprevive project. The project was kind of born from the problem that 75% of the global crop diversity has disappeared within the last 100 years. This obviously has some pretty serious implications for food security going forward. We're asking the question if archaeology can play a role in developing more sustainable practices in modern agriculture. We're trying to learn from the past to understand the present and better inform the future. The big objective of this project is to merge data from the deep history of farming with data from modern plant sciences. That's where Sonia comes into the project with Meriel. And we're focusing on 3 target crops in the Republic of Ireland. So rye, pea, and emmer wheat. We're trying to maybe reintroduce these crops to farmers. They used to be grown in Ireland all across prehistory, but in modern day, farmers have maybe kind of decided to focus on a smaller amount of crops. So we're trying to show these crops used to be grown here. Wouldn't it be a great idea if you maybe grew them again? How are we doing this? We have access to a huge repository of digital excavation reports from Transport Infrastructure Ireland, as well as a couple other sources as well. I'm going through these reports and looking in particularly at the archaeobotany section of each excavation report, trying to get all of the data, if any data exists, on the 3 target crops and placing them into a database that we've created in Microsoft Access for a little further analysis. How are we doing so far? We have a good spread of about 225 sites all across Ireland. This is giving us some really good information on the variety of uses and the environmental conditions in which the crops were grown and used, and right across all the historical periods going back to the Neolithic period in Ireland. If we look at pea for one of the crops we're looking at, we can see that pea was really not very popular before the early medieval period. We do have some instances of pea in features, but these are most likely intrusive material. This has been proven in one or two of the cases. So what's happening in the early medieval period? Well, this is kind of the time when Vikings are coming to town. So their urban societies are beginning to evolve in and around monasteries. And we can see that pea was being grown, but maybe not thought of very highly. This is taken from an 8th century law text showing the kind of popularity, the prestige of different crops within Ireland at the time. And you can see pea down here ranking in the bottom. And we do have historical sources showing that pea was ground into kind of a rough flour used in bread making, to thicken soups, gruels, that kind of thing, as a source of protein. And probably particularly in the medieval period, it became much more popular because we're starting to see it in bigger numbers all across Ireland in the different sites from the kind of medieval period. It takes a little bit of a dip in the post-medieval period, but this is probably more to do with the lack of sites dating from this period being excavated rather than a dip in use, in overall use. So what are we hoping to do with all of this data? Well, you can see here in this map, this is all the data I've collected so far on pea. We can see a few of these hotspots of pea production being kind of grown in that general corridor, going from Meath, Kildare, Laois, Kilkenny and Tipperary. And we've merged that with some of the modern data from Sonia's side of the project. And you can see it correlates quite nicely with some of the pea hotspot productions in the modern context as well. So there's something to be said there for that area of the country in pea production, but we also have it in other areas, but it's still not grown in large quantities in the modern context. So we're maybe trying to encourage farmers to get back into some pea growing, because it does have some very useful nitrogen fixing properties that can support the cultivation of some more of the demanding crops. So yeah, that's kind of it from me. Back to Meriel.
Just for the very final one. So thank you very much. So hopefully this has been a useful introduction. We've convinced you that what we're doing has use beyond archaeology, and we can collaborate with other people. So thank you very much to all our collaborators. And thank you to the Earth Institute.